The air in the hall was heavy, not because of the warm lights above or the soft murmurs filling the space. It was heavy because something was coming, something no one could predict. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, had entered the room 15 minutes ago, but he had not spoken a word. He sat near the edge of the long wooden table, his hands folded gently in his lap. His eyes were calm, not cold. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look around nervously like the others. He just sat there quietly. Everyone else in the room, some dressed in sharp suits and others with laptops open, kept glancing his way. They were waiting for the man whose words could shift the course of their careers, waiting for a reaction, a sign, anything. But Sundar said nothing, and then it happened. The door opened sharply, and a man in his early 30s, tall, loud, and clearly nervous, stepped inside. His name was Rohan. He had been part of the company for just under a year, talented but too eager, smart but not wise. He walked in with an energy that didn't match the stillness of the room. He looked around quickly, trying to seem confident, but everyone knew he was on edge. He was late, and he had made a mistake, one that had cost the company millions and wasted ad revenue. During a recent product launch, the mistake wasn't entirely his fault. But in tech, the line between fault and responsibility often blurs. People expected consequences. Some expected Rohan to be fired on the spot. Some secretly hoped for it. Others pitied him. But all eyes turned to Sundar. Rohan walked to his seat and sat down quickly. His hands trembled slightly as he opened his laptop. He didn't dare look in Sundar's direction, but Sundar looked at him not with anger, not with judgment, but with quiet, thoughtful eyes. Someone cleared their throat across the room. The tension cracked, just slightly. Then, out of nowhere, Rohan spoke. I know I messed up, and if you're going to fire me, I understand. His voice was shaky, but honest. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Everyone turned to Sundar. This was the moment. This was when power would speak, when titles and authority would form words. But Sundar did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He did not show disappointment. He simply said, "What have you learned?" Rohan blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out at first. "I've learned that speed is useless without accuracy," he said slowly. "And I've learned that I should have asked for help before it got worse." Sundar nodded gently. "Good," he said. "Just that. Not a lecture, not a punishment, not even a warning." "Then let's fix it together," Sundar added. The room froze. No one expected that. No one expected kindness. The story spread through the office like fire in dry grass. By lunch, every employee was whispering about what had happened. How Sundar Pichai, the man with the power to crush someone's career, in a single sentence, had chosen understanding instead. How he had reminded everyone that leadership wasn't about control, it was about character. Back at his desk, Rohan sat quietly. His screen was full of numbers, charts, corrections, but his mind was on something else. He thought about the way Sundar had looked at him, not with pity, but with belief, as if saying, "You are more than your worst moment." Hours later, when most of the office had emptied and the sun dipped low behind the glass walls of the campus, Rohan was still there, typing, correcting, learning. And Sundar walked by. He didn't say anything. He just placed a hand on Rohan's shoulder and nodded. Sometimes, that's all a person needs. Not applause, not praise, just quiet faith that they can rise again, and maybe, just maybe, be better than they were yesterday. Rohan never forgot that moment. Neither did anyone else who was in that room. Because that day, when everyone waited for Sundar Pichai's reaction, he chose kindness. The night after the meeting, Sundar sat on the small balcony of his home. The sky above was clear, dotted with stars, the kind that always reminded him of Chennai nights. He held a warm cup of tea in his hand, but it wasn't the tea that brought him comfort. It was the voice on the other end of the call, his mother. "Lakshmi Pichai, he said gently. "You always told me to pause before speaking when angry. Today, I almost forgot." Her soft laughter crackled through the speaker. "But you didn't, did you?" He smiled. "No, I didn't." Lakshmi paused, then said, "People are always watching, Kanna. Not to judge, but to learn. And your silence teaches more than most people's shouting." He closed his eyes and leaned back. "Do you remember," she added, "when you were in class 8 and the neighbor boy broke your radio?" Sundar laughed. "Yes, I wanted to fight him. You came home crying, but you didn't fight him. You told me if I fight, I will feel strong for 5 minutes, but empty for many days. Do you remember?" He nodded slowly. "You taught me that." "No," Lakshmi said gently. "You already knew. I only reminded you." Those words stayed with Sundar long after the call ended. That night, he slept thinking not of tech reports or corporate metrics. He slept thinking of his mother's hands. Hands that made doses in the morning and fixed broken transistor parts in the evening. Hands that never slept, never pointed in blame, but always reached out to lift someone. The next morning at Google campus, a new atmosphere had quietly taken shape. Employees who never spoke to each other began sharing ideas over coffee. Team leads, who once barked orders, began listening more during meetings. And Rohan arrived early, earlier than anyone. He brought with him a small notebook. It wasn't for work. It was personal. On the first page, he had written in clean letters, "Kindness is not weakness. It is strength with control." As the week went on, Sundar continued his usual scheduled board meetings, innovation reviews, strategy discussions, but in small moments, he watched. He watched how people were changing. In a cafeteria corner, he noticed 2 interns arguing softly over a design draft. One of them, frustrated, pushed the paper aside. The other paused, took a deep breath, and said, "I understand. Let's try again." It was small, almost invisible, but Sundar saw it, and in his heart, he knew people were learning. Not from policies, not from memos, but from example. Still, not everyone was happy. One man wasn't pleased at all. His name was Viren, a senior executive, sharp as a blade, respected by many, but feared by more. He had climbed the ladder quickly, making bold decisions and showing little tolerance for failure. He believed in results no matter the cost, and he had watched Sundar's reaction to Rohan with a quiet fury. He should have been removed, Viren told a colleague privately. "This softness, it's dangerous." The colleague nodded, unsure whether to agree or stay quiet. Viren had a plan. He believed leadership was about fear, not kindness, and he believed Sundar had become too soft. So he started watching, waiting, looking for the next mistake someone would make, planning to act before Sundar could. One evening, he called a meeting with a small team, including Rohan, launching a new beta feature. Viren said, "I want speed. No delays, no errors. If anyone slows this down, they're out." Rohan stiffened in his seat. "Understood," Viren added, looking straight at him. Rohan nodded. "Yes, sir." But inside, he felt the old fear return. The fear of messing up, of being blamed, of being thrown out again. He worked late that night. Too late. Skipping dinner. Skipping rest. And just like before, a mistake happened. Small, but real. And Viren saw it. He called an urgent review meeting the next morning, and this time, he invited Sundar. As the room filled, the air once again grew heavy. But this time, it was not curiosity, it was fear. Rohan stood in front of the screen, his heart pounding. He had discovered the mistake himself at 3 a.m. and had already fixed it, but the record was there. The glitch in the system. The proof that he had failed again. Viren stood slowly. "With all due respect, Mr. Pichai," he began. We are losing edge because we are tolerating carelessness. He looked directly at Rohan. This is the second time in 2 weeks that he's made an error. If this continues, we risk much more than embarrassment. The room went silent. Everyone turned to Sundar again. This was different. This time, the mistake had come after forgiveness. Surely this time, he would choose a different path. But Sundar did something no one expected. He stood up and walked slowly to the board. He picked up a marker and drew a circle. Then, he placed a dot in the middle. This dot is the mistake, he said quietly. This circle is the person who made it. He turned to the team. Do we erase the whole circle because of one dot? No one spoke. The same person who made the mistake, Sundar continued, stayed all night to correct it. He did not wait for someone else to fix it. He owned it. He improved it. He learned. That's what matters. Viren stepped forward. But we're not a charity, Sundar. We're a business. We have targets. We don't have time to teach lessons. Sundar looked at him calmly. Then we are not building a company. We are building a machine. And I don't lead machines. I lead people. Those words hung in the air like a quiet storm. Rohan's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away. He wasn't the only one moved. Even some of the toughest, most silent staff members nodded slowly. Viren said nothing more. But inside, something dark stirred. He had been challenged, and not with power, but with principle. After the meeting, Sundar stepped outside for fresh air. His phone buzzed. A message from his mother. Only 3 words. You made me proud. He smiled, and once again, he knew. Kindness was never weakness. It was quiet strength, and the world was always watching. The sun had barely risen, but the office was already awake. Not in the usual way, though not with cheerful greetings or the smell of fresh coffee. This time, something else filled the air. A whisper, a rumor. Did you hear what happened yesterday? One employee said, in a low voice near the elevator. Rohan made another mistake. Someone replied, and Sundar defended him again. It wasn't spoken with joy. Not with anger either. It was something in between. Confusion, disbelief, curiosity. What is he trying to prove? A senior developer muttered to his teammate. We're not school kids. This is Google. The halls echoed with soft footsteps and silent judgments. But Sundar walked through those same halls as if none of it reached him. His steps were calm, his eyes kind. But even kindness needs strength behind it, and Sundar knew. Strength was about to be tested. Inside a quiet meeting room, Viren sat with 2 other high-ranking executives. The door was closed, the lights dim, and the air filled with quiet tension. This is not how a company stays on top, Viren whispered. The others nodded. He's building a culture of forgiveness, Viren continued. It sounds nice. It wins hearts. But it loses time. And time is our most expensive asset. What do you suggest? One of them asked cautiously. Viren leaned forward. We show him. We show everyone what happens when mistakes go unpunished. We put pressure, not on Sundar directly, but on the system. We raise expectations, increase deadlines, stress test the entire floor. The other executive raised an eyebrow. You want the team to break? Viren smiled coldly. I want them to feel what happens when soft leadership meets real pressure. Either the culture cracks, or Sundar does. The plan was in motion by the end of the day. New deadlines appeared, unrealistic ones, last-minute changes to schedules, urgent review meetings at odd hours. Team leads were pushed harder, and whispers turned into complaints. Some thought it was just a busy season. Others started blaming the new work culture. A few began to lose patience with Sundar's approach, though no one dared say it aloud. But Sundar saw it. He saw the sudden shift in energy. He saw the nervous eyes, the tired faces, the late-night lights that shouldn't have been on. He knew something had changed, and quietly, he began to trace the lines backward. until they pointed to one place, Viren. But Sundar didn't react with anger. He didn't call him out. Instead, he invited him for coffee. The message was short: coffee at 4. Courtyard bench. Viren raised an eyebrow when he received it, but he went, and at 4 p.m., he found Sundar sitting on the edge of a simple bench, beneath a tall tree, the sky above calm and blue. Interesting location for a strategy meeting, Viren said flatly. Not a meeting, Sundar replied. Just coffee. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sundar spoke again. You want the company? To win, he said softly. Viren didn't answer. And you think I'm too soft? Still no answer. I understand, Sundar added. You think discipline is what moves companies forward, but I think dignity does. Viren looked at him sharply. You think dignity fixes errors? Makes products faster? Saves millions? Sundar turned and met his eyes. I think dignity builds people who do. Viren scoffed. Idealism. Sundar smiled faintly. Maybe. But idealism built the internet, built every tool we use. It's the belief that something better is possible. I won't lose that. Not here. Not now. Viren stood, then prepared to lose more than your ideals. He walked away without another word. Sundar didn't stop him. He finished his coffee quietly and looked up at the tree above. The leaves moved gently in the wind. They didn't fight the breeze. They bent with it and still stood tall. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. Rohan walked into a support team's office, not his own, and offered to help them troubleshoot a difficult module. They had no reason to accept, but they did, and what surprised them more, he solved the problem in 20 minutes. The team lead, Amira, sent Sundar a message right after. Your faith in him was not misplaced. Sundar read it and smiled, but the pressure was far from over. Viren's next move was already coming. He had quietly submitted a report to the board, suggesting a change in the leadership structure, suggesting that Sundar step back from certain operational decisions. It was bold, dangerous, and it was gaining support, because people in power often want speed more than soul, and Sundar knew. The real test of kindness was not in moments of peace, but in storms. That storm was almost here. The boardroom was quiet, but not calm. 12 people sat around the long table, each with their own expressions, some curious, some cold, a few unreadable. Their eyes flicked between screens and each other, avoiding Sundar's gaze. In front of them lay the report, a quiet letter from Viren, coded in formal words and numbers, but loud in meaning. It questioned Sundar's leadership, not directly, but clearly. Phrases like delay in executive decision-making and decline in operational urgency filled the pages. It mentioned the Rohan incident. It mentioned internal inefficiencies, and it recommended delegated oversight in higher-risk functions. In simple words, they wanted someone else to handle the harder decisions, someone less kind. Sundar sat at the head of the table. He hadn't spoken yet, not even when the proposal was read aloud, not even when Viren spoke with careful confidence, backing the idea with charts, timelines, and stress test outcomes. He had watched them all carefully, not to judge, but to understand. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Silence has a weight, Kana. Use it to make people listen to their own hearts. And now, the silence pressed heavy against the walls. Finally, a board member cleared his throat. Mr. Pichai, he said softly, we'd like to hear your view. Sundar nodded gently and stood up. He didn't open a file. He didn't hold notes. He looked at each person in the eye and spoke slowly. When I was 16, he began, I failed a physics test. Not because I didn't study. I had studied for days. But the exam was filled with questions that made me panic. I froze. When the results came, my teacher asked me to stay after class. I thought I would be punished. I was ready to be scolded. He paused, letting the story breathe. Instead, she gave me a cup of water and said, "You're smarter than this paper. You just need space to prove it." The room stayed still. She didn't remove me from the class. She didn't shame me, and the next exam, I topped. He walked slowly to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and drew a line. "This," he said, "is pressure." Then he drew another line just below. "And this is potential." He circled the gap. "What fills this gap," he said, "is trust." It turned them all. We don't build leaders by testing how quickly they obey. We build leaders by teaching them how deeply they think, and that takes trust. One woman on the board leaned back, arms crossed. "With respect, trust doesn't always deliver quarterly growth." Sundar nodded. "And fear doesn't always deliver people who stay. We don't just build products, we build people. When we forget that, the numbers may rise, but the soul disappears." His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it now. If we trade kindness for speed, we lose the one thing that made us different. He placed the marker down. "I will accept whatever decision you make," he said simply. "But if we're changing leadership to remove compassion from our model, then you're not changing roles. You're changing the foundation." He walked back to his seat and sat down. Silence returned. But this silence was not heavy. This one was thoughtful. The board took a vote, not all at once, not loudly, but carefully, and the final count. 9 against. The change. 3 for it. The proposal was rejected. Viren didn't speak. He didn't need to. The quiet around him said, "Enough." He had tried to shift the ground, but Sundar had reminded everyone where they stood, not on numbers, not on fear, but on people. When the meeting ended, Sundar stayed behind. He stood near the window, looking out over the city. His phone buzzed again. A message. This time, from Amira, the team lead. Rohan had helped. He just mentored 2 new hires today. Didn't wait to be asked. Another message followed. From a different team. A junior employee stayed late to help another team catch up. No reward expected. And then another. Your words are reaching more than you know. He smiled. Then a voice behind him spoke. You won. It was Viren. Sundar turned. Slowly. This wasn't a competition, he said. Viren's face showed no emotion. But his eyes, they held something. Not defeat. Not anger. But maybe confusion. You believe this can last? Viren asked. I believe it has to. Sundar replied. What if the next person fails bigger? What if the mistake is too costly? Sundar stepped closer. Then I'll still believe in them, he said. Because someone once believed in me. Viren didn't respond. He just nodded once and left the room outside. The air felt lighter. Not because the pressure had vanished, but because the weight had been carried with grace that day. No one was fired, no systems crashed, no crisis emerged, yet something powerful changed. People started checking on one another. Managers started asking, how are you doing? Before, where are we on this? And slowly, a new kind of strength began to grow inside the company. A strength rooted not in fear, but in quiet respect. It started with a headline. At first it was small, hidden in the corner of a tech news site. Nothing loud, just a quiet ripple. Anonymous source claims. Google leadership too soft to handle failure. Most people ignored it. Until 3 more headlines appeared. Insiders reveal culture of leniency under Sundar Pichai executives losing control over performance. Pressureckedness is not a leadership strategies, says former team lead B. The time the 4th article came out, the story had caught fire. Blogs picked it up. Twitter flooded with opinions. Some supported Sundar. Most didn't understand the full truth. And a few just wanted drama. Inside Google, the impact was immediate. Employees whispered in hallways again. Not about Rohan this time, but about Sundar. Will he step down? Is this why Viren wanted structural changes? Kindness doesn't trend well in crisis. someone said under their breath. In the middle of all this noise, Sundar remained calm. He walked the halls with the same quiet smile. He nodded at team members with the same warmth. But something was different now. He wasn't being greeted the same way. Some looked down when he passed. Some smiled politely, but without warmth. And a few avoided eye contact completely. But Sundar noticed. He noticed everything. He sat in his office that evening, lights dim, sipping tea that had gone cold. He opened his laptop and began typing something. Not a press release, not response to the media. It was a letter to himself. Dear Sundar, if today feels heavy, remember Uma's voice. She never yelled, never scolded, never gave up on you. You don't have to prove anything to anyone who doesn't know your heart. You just have to keep walking forward with kindness, even when the road turns dark. He read it once, then closed the laptop. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder. The sound filled the office like a quiet drumbeat. Meanwhile, Viren stood in a separate building, on a call. He won the board vote. Yes, he said. But public pressure is different. Media storms don't need votes. He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Give it 2 more days, he added. People want a strong leader, not a soft-spoken philosopher. What Viren didn't expect was what happened the next morning. It wasn't a memo. It wasn't a meeting. It was a movement. Someone had written a message on a whiteboard in the main hallway. Just 5 words. Kindness built everything we love. Beneath it, someone else added, don't mistake .com for weakness. And another, he believed in me when I didn't. Single quotes by noon. The entire wall was filled. Dozens of messages, stories, moments, people writing how Sundar's support had changed their lives. He stopped to ask how I was when my mother was sick. He gave me a second chance. When I failed a test presentation, he told me not to apologize for being human. The wall became a mirror, not of the company's brand, but of its soul. When Sundar walked past it, later that day, he paused. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a black marker, and wrote, "We build the future when we build each other." The room behind him had gone silent. A few employees had gathered. One of them, a junior coder named Sarah, stepped forward. "Sir," she said quietly, "don't listen to them. We see you." Sundar smiled gently. "Thank you. But this isn't about me. It's about us." Sarah hesitated, then said something she hadn't planned. "They tried to embarrass you, and we just realized how proud we are to be led by someone like you." Later that evening, Lakshmi Pichai called him. He didn't even say hello, just smiled and asked, "You saw it?" She chuckled. "Yes, and I cried." They sat in silence together on the call for a while. Then Lakshmi said, "The world teaches people to win. I taught you to care, and you chose that path even when it hurt. That is the real victory." But the storm was not over. That night, Viren made his final move. He contacted a high-level investor, someone with deep influence on Google's board. He leaked private internal notes and reshaped the narrative. The next day, an emergency board advisory meeting was scheduled. This time, Sundar wouldn't just face criticism. He would face the threat of removal. And this time, the stakes weren't just about kindness. They were about trust. Trust in the idea that humanity still had a place in leadership. Trust that grace wasn't weakness. As Sundar walked into the glass building the next morning, the lobby was full, not of reporters, but employees. Not shouting, not protesting, just standing quietly, shoulder to shoulder, from interns to team leads, all there for one reason, to show the board something numbers could never measure. And as Sundar passed through them, someone whispered, "Don't let them change you." He nodded once and stepped into the room, where his legacy one built not on fear, but on faith was about to be tested like never before. The room was colder than usual. The long table gleamed under the sharp white lights. Outside the boardroom's glass walls, hundreds of employees waited in silence. Inside, only 12 sat and Sundar. No laptops, no phones, no voices, just a heavy silence that wrapped around every chair. The chairman cleared his throat. "We're here to address the concerns raised by multiple shareholders," he said slowly. "Some of you have seen the press. Some of you have read the investor letters. The question is now in front of us: do we change leadership direction, or do we defend it?" He looked at Sundar. "You may speak, Mr. Pichai." Sundar stood up. He didn't carry notes. His voice didn't shake, but his words were slower, deeper, like they had come from far inside him. "I didn't expect this job to be easy," he said. "I knew the weight it carried, the decisions, the pressure, the responsibility." He paused. "But I made one promise to myself. I would never stop being human." Some shifted in their seats. "We live in a world that moves fast," he continued. "A world where numbers speak louder than names, where speed is mistaken for success. But behind every data point is a person." He took a breath. Rohan was one of them. And today, he's leading a team that just finished a product 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Sarah was another. She almost quit this job once, until someone stopped and asked how she was feeling. He looked around the table. If we remove kindness from leadership, we remove the part of us that creates loyalty, courage, and growth. Fear builds walls. Kindness builds bridges. The chairman nodded slightly, but the faces around him remained still. One board member spoke. "Kindness is noble, but this is business." Sundar looked at her gently. "Business is made of people," he said. "We serve billions of users, but if we forget to serve each other first, the rest means nothing." Then, he added something no one expected. "If you believe I'm unfit to lead this company because I choose compassion over cruelty, then let this be my last meeting. But understand this: removing me will not remove the culture we've built, because it's not mine, it's ours, and it's already growing beyond me." He sat down. No one spoke for a long time. Then the chairman stood. "We'll vote now." One by one, the board members gave their answer. The room was quiet with every word spoken. No, no, no. It kept going until 11 had voted, and all 11 said the same thing. The 12th paused, then said, "No." Sundar would stay, but the chairman wasn't done. He stood again. "This vote was not just about Sundar," he said. "It was about who we want to be. Do we want to be feared or respected? Do we want to follow the world's pressure or lead with our own values?" He turned to Sundar. "You've reminded us that leadership isn't about being the loudest. It's about being the clearest. And your clarity, your quiet strength, has guided this company in ways no spreadsheet can explain." After the meeting ended, Sundar stepped out into the hallway. The employees were still there, but they weren't quiet anymore. They clapped, not with wild cheering, but with steady, warm applause that filled the air like music. Some had tears in their eyes. Rohan stood in front. So did Sarah. So did dozens of others who had once been invisible in the system. They reached out their hands, and Sundar took them. No speeches, no cameras, just people. And when he walked out into the daylight, Lakshmi was waiting. She stood quietly, wearing a soft green sari, her eyes kind and shining. "Uma," he said with a small smile. She touched his arm gently. "You didn't win because you spoke," she whispered. "You won because you never stopped listening." That night Sundar sat on his balcony again, a cup of warm tea in his hand. But this time, he wasn't alone. His team had come over. Engineers, designers, writers, interns, old and new. They brought food, stories, and laughter. Someone asked him what the future would look like. Sundar smiled. "The future," he said, "belongs to those who lead with care. Not force, not fear, but care, and they all raised their cups, not just to him, but to each other, because that day, something greater than a career had been protected, something rare, something powerful, a belief that no matter how far you rise, you never forget where you came from, and you never stop choosing kindness, even when the world waits for you to do the opposite. Months passed. The headlines faded. The office returned to normal, or at least what normal now meant, but something deeper had changed. Not in the way buildings looked, or how meetings were run. It changed in how people spoke to each other, in how they paused to ask, "How are you?" before asking, "Where is the file?" In how junior engineers stayed a little longer to help their colleagues, in how team leads gave space instead of pressure, trust instead of threats, and all of it had begun with one moment, one reaction, one choice, to be kind when the world expected power. Sundar watched this quiet transformation from his corner office, not with pride, not with ego, but with peace. He still walked the same hallways, still greeted the same guards by name, still carried his own tea mug, instead of letting someone bring it to him. But now, wherever he went, people didn't look away. They looked up, not in fear, but in respect. One day, Rohan entered his office. He had grown, not just in rank, but in presence. The once nervous man now stood taller, clearer. "Sir," he said, "I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead," Sundar replied, closing his laptop. "I've been offered a director position at another company." Sundar smiled. "You've earned it. But I don't know if I should leave. I feel like I still owe something here." Sundar leaned forward. "Rohan," he said gently, "you owe us nothing. You gave back what was given to you. Now it's time to go and give that same belief to someone else." Rohan hesitated. "What if I don't lead like you? What if I don't carry the same calm?" Sundar shook his head. "You don't need to be me," he said. "You just need to be kind, to yourself, and to others. The rest will follow." Rohan smiled, eyes misting slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. When he left the room, Sundar sat back in his chair and looked out at the courtyard, the same bench where he'd once spoken to Viren during the hardest week of his leadership. Now, young employees sat there laughing, and Viren. He didn't leave the company. He stayed quieter, more reflective. He never apologized to Sundar in words, but one day, he walked into a review meeting and stopped the room mid-sentence. This person didn't meet the deadline. Someone had said. Viren looked at the employee and asked gently, "Why not?" The room froze, but the employee answered honestly, and Viren listened. Sundar heard about it the next day. He didn't say anything, he just smiled, because that was the real legacy. Not a product, not a policy, but a ripple, a quiet wave of compassion that kept moving, person to person, choice by choice. One evening, Sundar walked into the old Google library, a quiet space with books, couches, and a wall filled with photographs of past events. On the wall, someone had placed a new frame. It wasn't of a launch, not of an award, just a simple black and white photo. Sundar, sitting on the courtyard bench, holding a cup of tea, speaking with a young employee. Underneath the photo, 5 words were printed: "Lead with kindness, always. Always." He stood there for a while, then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. It was the note he had written to himself months ago. He opened it, read the words slowly, and added one more line at the bottom. "You were never alone, because kindness always returns, sometimes through applause, sometimes through silence, and sometimes through the simple choice of someone else who decides not to raise their voice, but raise someone's spirit instead." As the sun set outside the window, casting a golden light across the room, Sundar stood up, folded the note, and walked away, not for praise, not for power, but because someone, somewhere, might be watching, waiting, and wondering what to do next, and if they choose kindness, just as he once did, then the story will keep going, quietly, powerfully, forever.